Good morning, good morning. I see participants are joining. We have more than 100 now and it's still going up. The live streaming has started and panel members are ready. We have one panel member who's struggling a bit with the sound, but hopefully that gets sorted. So we're good to run. Let's start. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or perhaps good evening, depending on where you are on our new Planet Zoom. Welcome to our second webinar in the series on integrated urban water management, titled A Water Future for Cities. These two webinars are organized by UNESCO's New Delhi office, together with the National Institute for Urban Affairs of India. I'm Guy Brook, I'm the head of the Natural Sciences sector at UNESCO in Delhi, and I will moderate today's webinar together with Rahul Sachdeva, who is the Senior Program Manager at NIUA. To introduce today's webinar, I will use a few slides, but I promise that those will be the only ones I will use, and everything after that will be in discussion format. So let me try to share my screen. So I hope you can see this. Maybe a little bit of background. UNESCO and NIUA work regularly on urban water management. And perhaps I will have a minute or two at the end of the webinar to talk about the way forward for us. The idea of these two webinars stems from the need that we perceive to have more awareness. And honestly, also the current situation with COVID-19, which allows these kinds of events perhaps more easily to happen. I've included a few slides from the previous webinar to explain to you a little bit what we've done last time. So we went from what you know is the kind of problem statement, cities and water is often a problem. We try to explain that water is much more than a simple linear problem, if you want. It's a multidimensional problem, but it's also multi-sectoral. All sectors need water, all sectors are concerned. And that brought us to this whole contemporary philosophy of water security through integrated urban water management. As you will see, the webinar 2 weeks ago was chaired by the Director General of the National Clean Ganga Mission. And we discussed what is done and sometimes what is not done in a number of cities, Amsterdam, Melbourne, Los Angeles, Singapore, and Delhi. The focus was more on technology and institutional arrangements, things that can be done in the water sector. But from the discussions, it came out very strongly that there are other important factors than those factors in the water sector to achieve real transformation. So this is just to show you that the webinar actually really happened, so you can see how we were. So this second webinar is really looking at factors outside the water sector. So that's why we've titled it Making Water Everybody's Business, and I put that little question mark here and there. To some extent, we ask the question whether everybody now really considers it, that water is everybody's business. If you Google the expression water is everybody's business, you get thousands and thousands of hits. So I've pasted a few here, and it seems to be one of those truisms. Everyone agrees on it, and yet it seems to be elusive. Sorry, let me go back to that slide. So integrated water management, just like sustainable development, it's one of those concepts developed in the 1980s that seem to be so obvious and so rational, and yet more than 30 years later, we still haven't gone a very long way in achieving them. So what are the barriers? What are the drivers? So today we hope to learn a little bit more on why it's really everybody's business and perhaps what we could do to make it more everybody's business. And we focus on two key role players. the private sector, and the general public. So to do that, we're very grateful to have 6 excellent panelists with a complementary range of very interesting backgrounds. And I will briefly introduce them with some slides before joining them live again for discussion. So our keynote speaker is Mr. Vishwanath Srinathantaya. Sorry, I will only say Vishwanath from now on, I promise. He's actually a water expert, but he has a quirk because he's very passionate about sustainable cities. Running a company called Biome, as you can see, that focuses on ecological architecture. Among his other interests is also communication. You could say water literacy, having written a column called Waterwise for the Hindu for many years. And as you will see, he's very passionate about the subject, and I'm certain he will give us a great start. After the keynote speaker, our first panelist is Ms. Namita Vikas. She's very much part of the business sector, but in a unique way. She focuses on advising the private sector to shift towards sustainability. So sustainability as business, really. She's widely recognized nationally and internationally for this work, and we are very grateful to have her with us as well. Our second panelist will be Ms. Nidhi Pundir, who heads the corporate social responsibility arm of HCL Technologies, a large multinational company. She leads a number of very interesting and innovative programs as the director of the HCL Foundation, and interestingly also has extensive experience in civil society. So we will benefit from both angles, the civil society and the private sector angle. Very fortunate to have her here today as well, and we look forward to that interesting perspective. Our third panelist is Mr. Nabarun Bhattacharjee. I hope he manages to get his microphone sorted. He is also a water and urban planning expert, but again with an interesting angle, because his experience lies with international financing in the sector. So as you can see, he has been working with some of the leading sources of financing, international financing in the sector, including the World Bank. So we are happy to have his perspective as well. And I move on to our fourth panelist, who is Ms. Anupama Madhok. She's a communicator. Communication plays a key role in all this. So she manages a magazine dedicated to the water sector called Water Digest, and tries to inform better about a sector that perhaps is not always very good at informing or communicating. She has also received national and international recognition for this work, and also comes with an additional interest in youth engagement in water. Very pleased also to have you here with us and share some experiences. And the furthest in distance from us is Ms. Sandra de Vries, who joins us from the Netherlands, where it is very early in the morning. So thank you for that, Sandra, sorry. She's a water expert who has started her own company in a particular niche, the area of citizen science, and we'll hear more about that. And Sandra and I actually met in the Caribbean a few years ago, where she supported a UNESCO project called Sandwatch, which involves systematic monitoring of beaches by children and community members. So this is the panel with whom you will spend the next hour and a half with. And finally, just let me remind you of our agenda before I return back to the live screen. We will have a keynote address by our keynote speaker, followed by 2 rounds of questions with the panelists. I will open the batting in the first round and then hand over to Rahul. And then we will have a 3rd round of questions, which are questions from participants. So on that note, let me return to the live screen. And good morning again, now that we see each other properly again. I hope all the participants are able to match the live faces of our panel members to the pictures you just saw on the slides. That's the first exercise. Fortunately, I can. Can I now invite Mr. Vishwanath to give his opening remarks, and apologies for butchering your surname earlier. Sir, the virtual floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Guy. Shrikantaya is difficult enough to pronounce for myself, and you've done a pretty good job of doing it. Thank you for that. So, integrated urban water management, and to do a keynote speech in 10 minutes, it's a real tough ask. I try and limit myself to certain thoughts which emerge for me working in my city, Bangalore, in Karnataka in South India. And what I have seen as integrated urban water management and raising some of the key issues which are sought on social and economic aspects of it. Right? So that will be the focus of my quick presentation. When we look at IUWM, the photograph that Guy had already shown the slide, generally we think of integration in terms of the technical aspects of water, right? The rainwater, wastewater, groundwater, piped water, and we look at it. But as we all know, and as the discussion last 2 weeks back also pointed out, integration is also about many other integrations. For me, the key has been the social integration aspect of water management, right? So making the invisible visible. In my city, one of the first things that IUWM should address, in my opinion, is universal connection and access, especially inclusiveness, participation. All these should become focus attention of IUWM as things go. So I use the 6-lens approach to integration: the social, the technical integration of all the kinds of technologies we have. Let's say, for example, in wastewater, in my city, we have 28 wastewater treatment plants of different technologies. And how do you make sure that they talk to each other in terms of standards of treatment, in terms of future proofing? All these become a challenge. Institutional integration for IUWM is also a key challenge because a city is located in a basin, right? And then a city has a hinterland for wastewater flows. It has a basin from where it gets fresh water. And in the absence of institutions integrating themselves, let's say from a river basin institution to the city level, to the ward level, to a sub part of the city where democratic participation is made sure institutionally, we will never have IUWM completely. Financial integration. Most of the big challenges that come in India is regarding the financing of the institutions which deliver water, whether it be the local government or specialized institutions like in my city, the Bangalore Water Supply and Sewerage Board. Not much attention is paid to the financial stability of these institutions. Say with example, in terms of the investment potential that they have, how will they recover costs? All these become key issues. In India, legal integration is also crucial because groundwater continues to be the single largest provider of water nationally, but also within cities, right? And groundwater is very loosely regulated, very loosely legally grounded. And so therefore, how do we get legal integration between, say, wastewater, groundwater, rainwater, and pipe water? That's a key one. Finally, there's the environmental integration of keeping our cities within the global ecosystem, or the ecosystem which supports it environmentally, but also is impacted by it environmentally. So this 6-lens approach has helped me a lot in trying to understand IUWM and push it forward. So let me just give you some quick examples what I mean by it. Now, groundwater in my city, rainwater for recharge, there are 400,000 boreholes, each going up, some going up to 1,800 feet in the city, withdrawing 500 million liters per day. That's a rough, crude estimate. The withdrawal is completely unmanaged. Yeah, it's not legally governed. There are some simple rules, but they're not put on the ground. So here's what we tried out. There are well diggers from a traditional well digging community who earn their livelihood from digging wells, cleaning wells, deepening wells, desilting wells. Now, they don't have a job because borewells have come into the city and people have forgotten the memory of the well. But here, through policy, making rainwater harvesting mandatory and recharge mandatory, it's possible for these well diggers to earn a livelihood to dig what are called recharge wells. These recharge wells pick rooftop rainwater or storm water, as in the photographs you see, filter it and push it into the aquifer. Now, the city has a goal with civil society to dig 1 million recharge wells. So livelihoods then can provide rainwater harvesting, which actuates policy and law and makes sure that the city gets water security. This is one approach of IUWM where livelihoods can be integrated, because in India, it's multiple sourcing of water. Water does not come from the pipe pipeline alone, it comes from groundwater, it comes from tanker, it comes from bottled water, and so on and so forth, right? So there we have to look at the social aspects of it. Now look, the other example that I want to put before you is lakes and wetlands. Now there are two kinds of engagements which communities have shown. One, they've taken the state institutions to court demanding that the lakes be protected and cleaned up. The second is more a partnership initiative. Again, I'll show you some pictures where communities organized around the lakes themselves sign a MOU with the local water authority or the local government and help to manage the lake. In this particular example, the treated wastewater from a 15 million liter per day wastewater treatment plant comes through a constructed wetland and then fills up a lake. The lake provides livelihoods for fishermen. The fishermen are then engaged in keeping the lake free from macrophytes like the water hyacinths that you see in the photograph left. And then it becomes a biodiversity spot. So fishermen and community people as part of the solution of IUWM in managing surface water. This is one way we have to imagine it, and how can that be fostered. The third aspect of it is that when the lake itself is rejuvenated, can we try IUWM at a scale of a micro watershed? Can we imagine IUWM as a series of components of watersheds within a city, micro watersheds in a city, and work on each one of the watersheds to practice the philosophy of IUWM is one approach that we can take. This is one lake in an 18.5 square kilometer catchment which has been revived, and groundwater has now become one of the single largest sources of water in that particular catchment, right? So that's one example. The other example is the one of wastewater. Now, wastewater has been constantly imagined to be reused within the city itself. Examples are given from Singapore or Windhoek in Namibia. But if a city is situated in a hinterland, which is drought prone, yes, and farmers are crying out for water, then the city can strike a partnership like Bangalore has done and transfer treated wastewater to fill lakes. Secondary treated wastewater, which is chlorinated, now fills up about 134 lakes around Bangalore, which then recharges the aquifer, as you see in the photograph. And farmers pick it up from those open wells, shallow wells, use drip irrigation and get cultivation. So in IUWM, a city can also become responsible for its hinterland, right? And for the farmers. A city should not imagine all wastewater for itself. Wastewater has many roles: agricultural, ecological, and even urban reuse. And a good partitioning of it should be attempted, right? Like Bangalore is trying out. And in the last 2 weeks, the discussion was around water. Here's a set of apartments where communities are showing what can be done. TZ apartments, about 94 of them, flats and villas, actually recharge all the rainwater that falls on the campus. But more importantly, it picks up the wastewater which they generate, treat it through this system that you see, including a final RO system, and actually drink it themselves. So communities become exemplars of overcoming the yuck effect. What you see on the right is the chairman of the Pollution Control Board, the then chairman, drinking this treated wastewater. So this has been the first set of villas and apartments, insofar as I know, in India, which actually recycles wastewater and drinks it. Now, can this be taken as a model and then pushed through other apartments and other gated communities? It's a challenge for us in Bangalore, and slowly that is being pushed forward. So IUWM is about getting community solutions and ratcheting it up and taking it to scale. Corporate social responsibility. What we find is that the large canvas of what needs to be done for water and wastewater should be available before everybody in the city. That big picture should be presented, on which the corporate social responsibility initiatives can then choose whether I want to do rainwater harvesting in a school or whether I want to rejuvenate a lake, and so on and so forth. And there should be transparency in the funds that are received by the government institutions and the impact that is to be achieved by this particular project. Yeah. So here, state public sector called the Bharat Electronics Limited is now investing CSR funds and setting up a 10 million liter per day wastewater treatment plant. Again, this treated wastewater, 8 million will come to a lake and rejuvenate the lake. 2 million will go to the corporate itself. And with the 2 MLD that they get a return on investment of something like 3 years. So partnerships can be struck where the community benefits are also there and the investing company also benefits. And this is one of the first examples that I can think of where a corporate is actually investing in a city level wastewater treatment plant, a 10 million liter per day. The entrepreneurship ecosystem is also ramping up. There are large-scale investors in large-scale water treatment systems and wastewater treatment systems, but there are also smaller ones which develop rainwater filters, rainwater harvesting systems, wastewater treatment and recycling. There are small companies which actually take treated wastewater at an apartment scale and ramp it up into drinking water standards. Smart meters is picking up at apartment level and flat levels. and designing IUWM at community scale, like 50 acres, 100 acres is also happening. And there are entrepreneurships which are doing aquifer mapping and management for large institutions. So this entrepreneurship ecosystem needs to be fostered if we want to kick in sustainability in water places. So finally, the last slide that I want to present to you is IUWM may be better understood as an ecosystem that we need to create rather with dynamic nudges through knowledge, legal, and economic measures. Knowledge measures, putting up knowledge and information and data in the public system, legal measures which tie together all forms of water, economic nudges where ecosystems of entrepreneurships are encouraged, rather than physical plans alone. And what we need perhaps is some sort of a layering of a systems design thinking institution over a water supply institution, which does this coordination. Because, for example, regulating private water tankers is not actually a water sector job, but an economist's job. It's a market job, it's a competition regulation job, so on and so forth. And citizens' role is also one of partnership with institutions, but it's an important role to keep a watch on the state and perhaps use the judiciary to keep the state accountable. So that's the role that we see for communities, the social sector, and for the economic systems to go around. Thank you for the time given. This was my ideas that I wanted to share with you. Over to you, Guy.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. Thank you for that. I promised everyone that he would be passionate, and he clearly is very passionate. I'm a little bit biased, but because I also think it's a subject that we can all be passionate about. And thank you for highlighting the systems thinking, and also a very interesting point that you briefly made. You referred a few times to my city, and I think that's a very good point that you make, that all cities have different needs, different objectives, different priorities. So there is not a one-fits-all approach. And then, of course, what you underlined, that different actors, there are opportunities to involve different actors, and their roles may also differ depending on the conditions. Thank you very much for that. I think we definitely had a good start to put us in the middle of the subject. So let me turn to our panelists, and let me start with Ms. Namita Vikas with the Mumbai background. I'm sorry, I'm enjoying it. Ms. Vikas, we've discussed, can you just unmute for a little bit before, so we have a bit of an echo. Thank you very much. So we've discussed integrated urban water management with experts in our previous webinar, and we found the technology exists, and the implementation, as was also just outlined, it's not necessarily one massive techno project, but actually different incremental steps can be taken towards more sustainable approaches. But then, of course, each of that kind of investment or initiative requires a number of factors, including political support and also including financial resources. It was also mentioned earlier. So, for instance, do we invest in a new dam, or indeed in aquifer recharge, or do we invest in a recycling plant or something similar? So as someone with extensive experience in the corporate world, would you agree that the private sector, including the financing institutions, can actually be a barrier for creating sustainable cities if they continue to favor investment in traditional approaches? But on the other hand, can the private sector actually also be a driver for change towards innovation and more sustainable infrastructure? So I'd be grateful for your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guy, and thanks a lot for inviting me to this session. My immediate response to your question is that an integrated urban water management system needs integrated water financing solutions, and that is something that one needs to really bring about from a finance perspective. So undoubtedly, the private sector as a whole doesn't need much convincing as far as the AUWM is concerned. And in pockets, we have seen institutions who have been working both on the demand and the supply side of water, may it be from a finance standpoint, or may it be corporations that are taking it up from their CSR financing standpoint, right? So I need not emphasize on how important this resource is from a domestic consumption or an agri sector, or for that matter from an industrial usage standpoint. What I would like to highlight here is that while there is a water deficit issue and extreme scarcity, I think data shows that India gets adequate supply of water. So against a requirement of 3 trillion cubic meters of water annually, we receive 4 trillion cubic meters of rain. I think the issue to address is that of inefficiency, mismanagement, and misuse that needs to be also tackled from a capital inflow perspective. And I'm just going to go a little deeper into that to understand, to just give a perspective from a financier's lens. So specific to India, what are the kind of technical challenges that we see? So, may it be increase in water consumption and waste in the urban areas, increase in irrigation and agriculture demand, water cycle imbalances with the overall reduced precipitations, industrial growth, waterborne diseases, lack of technology, and of course, political and regulatory disputes. Therefore, it is very important to strategically bring together an ecosystem that will action on all fronts. And Mr. Vishwanath very eloquently mentioned, the 6 lens that he's used, and I think that's very, very relevant. It's also very important to understand the risks better and to facilitate the movement of capital towards this sector. So risks are, need to be looked at, and that therefore that, closing on that investment gap would be clearly linked to the risks that are out there. So if one looks at, to close the gap between the water demand and the supply by 2030, and I'm going by SDG's target date, finance is critical. Private sector involvement would come along, and alternative financing mechanisms moving. You asked, traditional financing vis-a-vis alternative innovative financing mechanisms. I think that do exist in the market today. So if you look at public-private partnerships in the water sector and finance linked to it, so government has been working on to promote infrastructure projects through the PPP model. And the PPP model enables the private sector to participate in public infrastructure projects through management contracts. These could be with or without investment requirements, or through long-term delivery models, which are on the build, operate, transfer kind of an agreement, right? In India, what we've seen is that the PPP projects in the water sector have begun to focus on augmenting bulk water supply systems through private financing. And today, while the majority of the PPP projects are aimed at leveraging the private sector capability to bring in operations and maintenance improvements and enhance the efficiency of the distribution system, the important mechanism instated to promote such projects is the viability gap funding. And this viability gap funding, which may not make financial sense to private investors, but are of social significance from a government standpoint. So in such cases, the viability gap funding is utilized to make investments attractive for private players, and this kind of funding is available for water supply and sewage projects. These are also present in through another financial means for such projects, especially the ones that have high capital costs. Also, another model that is evolving is the hybrid annuity-based PPP model for the waste treatment, and we've seen some examples in case of one of the projects in the Namami Gange initiative. So, a hybrid annuity-based PPP model is a mix of EPC and BOT. So, both these models put together. So, in an EPC model, the government pays private players to build the infrastructure, while the private player plays no role in the ownership or the maintenance, and the BOT is naturally build, operate, and maintain the infrastructure. So, what we've seen is in one of the national mission for Clean Ganga, under that initiative, the implementation arm, which is the National Ganga River Basin Authority, under a hybrid annuity model, came up with a PPP to the private sector for construction and maintenance of a 50 MLD sewage treatment plant. with 100% central sector funding, the project had to be undertaken through a special purpose vehicle, where 40% of the capital cost quoted was to be paid on the completion of the construction, while the remaining 60% of the cost was to be paid or is being paid over the life of the project as annuities, along with the operations and the maintenance costs. Both the annuities and the OEM payments are linked to the performance of the STP, ensuring continued performance of the asset created due to better accountability, ownership, and optimal performance. So I think linkage to the performance is the most critical part when it comes to financing and the successful implementation of the public infrastructure sector. We've seen this also in the highways, the road projects, and that can be far more emulated in the water sector. I want to highlight one other area, finally, my final comment, and that is on, the CSR funding and the role of CSR funding to be extremely innovative. So, we had undertaken, as a part of my earlier role with one of the private sector banks, we had undertaken financing of the water ATMs. So like you have the cash ATMs, we worked with the railways as well as the Delhi Jal Board, the Delhi Water Board, to institutionalize water ATMs where the CapEx was paid through the CSR funding and the OPEX was to be financed through the sale of the water. And this is at a minimal cost of 6 rupees for 20 liters of water, particularly targeted to the social, the underprivileged communities. And it is a very successful project which is now being emulated in Nagpur, in Karnataka, Bangalore, and other areas. So I think, a CSR can come in as a huge force, given that there is not much participation of CSR funding in the water sector. We've seen more of that in skilling and education. I think there are a huge lot of opportunities that we see, which can come in from different funding sources. And I will, maybe later on, if I get an opportunity, I'll talk about what are the other alternative financing sources. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vikas. Also, I picked a few things from what you were talking about. The importance of understanding the private sector and issues around risks and the importance of performance before actually they will embark on investments. And then also the examples you gave about actual opportunities that exist, and not only opportunities, but practical examples of these types of public-private partnerships, which were very interesting. You ended by touching on CSR, and that gives me a nice entry point towards my next panel member, Ms. Nidhi Pundir. I have a question for you. As you saw, the title of our webinar is that water is everybody's business, or making water everybody's business, but I put a bit of a question mark on it, because we'd like to think it is, but is it really? So as someone who has an interesting background, partly in civil society and of course now in the corporate world, I would like to also ask your view on what drives the private sector. From an outsider's view, and I'm playing the devil's advocate here deliberately, it could seem that CSR is mainly done because in India it is mandatory, and as part sometimes of an additional marketing strategy purely to gain visibility. So as I said, I'm playing the devil's advocate. I know you will possibly correct me. Would you agree with that? Perhaps it was more like that in the past. And do you see an evolution in private companies from the past, maybe sponsoring or charity, towards really a genuine interest as citizens and partners in sustainable cities? Could you give us some ideas on that?
Thank you, Guy, and absolutely fabulous interventions by previous speakers. And, Mr. Vishwanath already put like that amazing ecological framework. See, CSR has evolved in the country for sure. And, initially, I think the corporate sector perhaps had difficulty understanding the framework itself. But I would say that for several corporates, it was happening way before the law came in India, and HCL is also one of them. Having said that, let's come to water discourse that we were at. See, predominantly the presence of the big corporates would be in cities, and there's a large population of people who work with the corporates who also belong to the cities. So what happens is that for people when they come to work to these cities, essentially they don't belong to these cities, and there's this whole heavy phenomena of migration that happens. And most of the cities where there is presence of big corporates, you would see they are all habitated by people coming from other places, and there is no belongingness to that particular city. And why I'm bringing that point is that it's extremely important for people, first of all, to feel that they belong to this particular city. And I heard Mr. Vishwanath, bringing that word my city. So unless that my city connotation happens or my place happens and that belongingness happens, it's very difficult for us to conserve anything. And if we leave it to governments, or if we leave it to RWAs, or the external institutions to manage something as core or as important as water, it doesn't happen. So I think that's where the corporate social responsibility agenda weaves it quite well, where we generate massive awareness amongst our own employees through CSR and a concept called Power of One, where we work with each employee in order to sensitize them towards the social issues, and water conservation being one of the critical issues. And they come forward in heavy numbers, cleaning the lakes and making their own hands dirty and engaging in our water conservation work. So from the foundation perspective, from CSR perspective, we take a very scientific approach to it. And there is a clear ecosystem, I would say, or rather ecological framework that we use, wherein we sign and we work with government directly, identifying where exactly the gaps are. And there are these formal memorandum of understanding in place wherever we have presence. And that's where I say the role of a direct partnership between business, the corporate social responsibility arm of business with government. And believe you me, the kind of response that we have received from municipal corporations or from district administrations has been absolutely amazing. They are equally concerned. What happens is that the traditional wisdom and the traditional knowledge, or let's say the indigenous knowledge about the landscape of the cities, has got lost. Because of heavy migration, nobody belongs here. People come from outside. Nobody knew that in a building where I'm sitting today and operating, perhaps it's been built on a lake, and things like that. So just to give you a quick case study example from a city where I work from, Noida, we would often see water logging in various places, and we would often wonder whether these are some kind of water bodies. And with that thought in mind, we approached the district administration. We also approached the Jal Shakti mission, and that's when it was just being launched. And we realized that revenue department was also concerned, Jal Shakti mission was also concerned, and that point in time we thought, why not use technology to start mapping the water bodies, existent, non-existent, past, whatever is sitting there as of date. And we were able to map, there are 1,700 big and small water bodies in this one district. Ponds of smaller size, big size, water bodies, grasslands, and so on. So with that mapping in hand, it became an extremely good policy advocacy tool, and revenue department very much came on board, and they said, we want to map those. And we trained their own people, junior engineers, with technology, enabling them with technology, and something as simple as geotagging was done, and these water bodies were marked. This was just about 1.5 years ago. And then we said that we will take up 50, I mean, maybe more water bodies and rejuvenate. And, to begin with, we will just showcase how do you really revive a water body. And that work is underway, and already more than 30, I mean, to give you the exact figure, 38 water bodies have already been revived, and the village community structures have been formed, and as we call it, Jal Yatra and Jal Sabhas, and the whole ownership. But just to kind of the gist of this model, I would say, is the largest citizens ownership on the mapping of water bodies and belonging to those, the ownership that they have to take at the village level as well as at the district level. The government's ownership also, that they recognized and they acknowledged that these were ponds, and they stopped, selling this land further. And then, of course, use of technology in here. And another beautiful piece that comes in is volunteerism. So people come forward in on Saturdays, Sundays, you suddenly see, like, of course, during COVID times, things have got slightly, volunteerism has got impacted. But since they were interested, they would still kind of, digitally monitor and use satellite imagery and so on. So I think if we approach the problem scientifically and being rooted in these cities, there is a whole lot of relationship that one has with the district level administration and the state level machinery, that it is rather under CSR agenda easy for us to weave the water agenda and to work on it, demonstrate and build the right kind of partnerships. And that's what we are focusing on. Water conservation doesn't essentially mean that we continuously only revive water bodies. I mean, that's one thing which we do. But there is a big agenda about, mass awareness, citizens, collectives around it, trusts around the water bodies. They need to also finance their own water bodies. And once we are able to, I would say, reach that level where they start fundraising for their own water body to maintain it, I think success is achieved. So basis the same model, we are working in Madurai, we are working in Bangalore, we are working in Chennai. By and large, I think it's been extremely I would say heartwarming to see the kind of engagement that happens around these water bodies, because people are concerned. They want to conserve water. I mean, that's something which is very real and no further awareness is needed for people to understand that water is critical. And putting it on the urban development agenda is critical. And through CSR, I think the kind of models that at least we have tried out, there is an extremely high potential to scale them up and take them to larger number of cities. I'll stop here and maybe come again when you have further questions. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think you countered my question very, very well, giving actually a fascinating example of how modern companies can be involved as citizens, basically, in sustainability actions and using their know-how in a sector, water sector in this case, that is not necessarily theirs, but they have know-how and skills that can be brought in. So it builds on what we said earlier, that there's not one solution to all, and also the actors can play roles that can greatly differ, that we don't maybe always expect. So thank you very much for that. So I would like to turn back a little bit from CSR funding to direct international investment in the sector. And Mr. Nabaroon, I hope your microphone is working now. I think it's working. So let me ask you a question about capital. So the capital investment, water is an expensive sector. The capital investment and the operational costs to produce and supply water to millions of people in rapidly, I think rapid is even an understatement, rapidly growing cities is very high. And one of our speakers 2 weeks ago said that cities often manage water from crisis to crisis. So capital tends to become available when there is a crisis, rather sometimes than proactively. Without a crisis, again, I'm trying to be provocative, water seems less important. What would be your advice based on your experience to cities seeking investments, including from international financiers, to proactively, so before the crisis, upgrade or beef up their existing water infrastructure and services? Happy to get your thoughts on that, sir.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Okay. First of all, thank you for bringing in this the concept of IUWM, integrated urban water management. I have a question in my own mind that a country like India, for example, with more than 4,000 plus urban local governments and cities, how many of them really understand this concept or understand what is meant by IUWM or integrated water management? Now, when it comes to day, you are very correct. They survive from crisis to crisis. So it's basically a crisis management. Now, in case of water, obviously, you can do crisis management once, twice, thrice, but after that, it really takes its toll. Now, if I look at the issue of water management and then related to this, my first emphasis or focus would come on the issue of urban governance or institutional arrangement or framework for actually water delivery and management in a city. Now, we all know, and I would be talking mainly on Indian context because in terms of the Constitution Amendment which happened in 1992, and as per the 12th schedule of that constitutional amendment, the functions of urban local governments, one of the most important and specific function or responsibility is of water supply, domestic, industrial or commercial purpose within the city. And second, related to this is public health, sanitation, etc. And particularly since we are all now in this mid of this huge COVID-19 crisis, and as you really see that so far we don't have any exact treatment or vaccine. So it's more on taking precautions, and for which, we have been hearing hand washing and all of that. Everything requires water, and this sitting in Delhi, in South Delhi in a flat, I may not be actually facing the issue of hand washing 20 times a day. But just across in the slum or unrecognized areas, people have problems of even drinking water. So the issue here I'm trying to focus is, if we want to talk about integrated urban water management systems or the concept itself, we must go first to look at who is responsible, who is accountable, and that's local government. The moment you look at local government, then you see what are the issues related in the local government on water management. So here it goes right that they live or exist from crisis to crisis. But if you look at the institutional arrangement for delivery and management of water in India, it's also, there are a lot of different models you will find. There are state water boards, which basically do all the capital work. And then the municipality has to manage or operation and maintenance. That too, the technical people are borrowed from state governments. And then some of the bigger cities have specific water boards, a separate entity. And there the capital works and the issues of relationship with the local government and who is responsible obviously becomes an issue. There are certain system inadequacies which we have to deal with. One, in management of water at city level, there's huge lack of professional cadres. Second, there is absolute absence of robust human resource management system in most of the cities. I'm not talking about Delhi or Bangalore or Bombay, but if you really start looking at 4,000 plus second tier and then go into the lowest level of urban areas and cities in India, this is a major issue. Third, and most importantly, inadequate involvement of communities in service delivery in terms of either planning or maintenance, which affects the planning and access to essential services. So this brings the issue of professionalization of municipalities in terms of technical capacity, number one. Second, we come to financing, and you specifically asked for this financing issue. Now, there has been a lot of central government schemes, which are sort of huge schemes, and one of the major one, which has run for 6-7 years, used to be called Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Reforms Program, JNNURM, which has now been replaced by 3 or 4 central schemes. One of them are the Smart Cities program. Then you have the Amrut, which is urban rejuvenation. Then you have a Swachh Bharat on sanitation. And so similarly, and in a way, I was somehow involved with the ministry on actually framing the guidelines for those. But when it comes to looking at the financial requirement and how finances are generated, we find that purely the cities really wait for state government or central government to provide funds for capital works. And operation and maintenance itself, the cities have very, very meager own source revenue. And Indian cities average own source revenue is not more than 50%. In fact, the 14th Finance Commission put a figure which is around 13, 14, 51.6%. And own source revenue is something which comes out of the inadequate taxation powers with municipalities currently, which is not commensurate with the financing needs. Now, water, wastewater, sewerage, stormwater drainage, these are one of the major sectors of investment in a city. Then the only major source of income or own source revenue for a municipality or city is the property tax, which the administration of which is a big question mark in India, because I think even some of the 2-3 cities survey that I had done almost 7-8 years back showed that the property tax potential is not even exploited to the extent of 60% of the overall potential. So there is a huge potential to improve own source revenue in terms of proper administration and expansion of the property records in improving the finances of a regular city or municipality. Then the next major issue in particularly water management is as inappropriate user charges. Now the whole practice of user charges in India somehow has been looked as not fair. Now, And the cost or the charges which are made by recovered by some of the cities has no link with user cost. So there's absolute inefficient cost recovery. So in terms of own source revenue and actually generating finances for urban water management in cities, these two things third, and I like the way Vishwanath put all those areas of the understanding and knowledge or information for the citizens as well as the municipalities to understand what are the different other water bodies and water sources available which can be rejuvenated and which can be maintained and can add to the water resources for a particular city. Secondly, the issue of utilization of groundwater versus surface water. And again, you will find in most of the cities, more than 65 to 70% water is from groundwater. So this is being extracted right and left. In Delhi, 30 years back, since I stay in Delhi, 30 years back, I used to get water if you start drilling hole 30 feet, and today it has gone to 300 feet. So naturally, the extraction of water in terms of surface water versus groundwater is another issue which our cities really are not at all conscious or looking at how much of surface water is being used for the entire water management of the city. So after taking these two, I think
could I ask you to wrap up? Sorry, you lost your.
Yeah. Just wrapping up, the last one is on the finance. I would like to say that the huge potential of market-based finance has not been exploited. It was tried out and I would specifically talk about municipal bonds and pooled financing bonds, which so far in last 15 years has hardly raised 1,500 crores, whereas it has potential to mobilize 1,000 to 1,500 crores every year for investment in urban infrastructure, particularly water sanitation. The international financing support had started with first BOT project on water in Tamil Nadu in Tirupur. And I was very much involved in that. With that, then the second thing, which again, through USAID and the bank were pushed to look at municipal bond issue of municipal bonds, credit rating of cities. All of those are now available, but the cities are not really taking initiative to come out and look at sources of market borrowing, and these are very, very potential possibilities. Maybe I can come again later. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir, and sorry for interrupting you. I was beeped in my ear that we are running a bit over time, so I thank you for that. Thank you for your understanding. You mentioned at the beginning something about whether municipalities really know what IUWM would be about. Can you switch off your mic now? Thank you. So I'll go, given the time constraints, I'll go straight to our communicator, Ms. Anupama, because communication was already mentioned there. And a question for you. In your work as the publisher of a water magazine, you liaise with many stakeholders in the water sector, and your publication mainly reaches that sector, but you also try to reach the wider public, and basically form something of a bridge between the sector and the wider public. Now, in the context of improving urban water management, do you see this type of communication between the water industry and citizens as an opportunity? Do you think the water sector can better inform the public? And perhaps vice versa, is there an opportunity for the public to participate more in the water sector? Thank you for that.
Hello, Geet. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for having me on this panel and highlighting one of the important string in the entire, integrated urban water management, which is communication. Also, it was wonderful hearing Mr. Vishwanath and our previous speakers, wherein I got this feeling that yes, somewhere things do suggest that people are aware about the water sector. At what level they are aware and what kind of support they get from the policymakers is what I'll be interested in talking more. So I would like to start from giving an example of democracy. Democracy is all about participation by the citizens of any country in an act of building a nation. And in the process, they do participate. And when we are talking about such an important resource like water, it is very important that the participation has to be on the forefront. So when we talk about water sector, if we say that one-side approach will work, of course it won't. It has to be a two-sided approach where public has to participate and the policymakers also need to have a fair communication channel when it comes to the policies they are bringing up. Especially in the current times, when we are dealing with this crisis, the pandemic, of course, there is immense pressure on the availability of water and water usage, giving to the pronounced use of water as recommended for the hand washing and other sanitizing activities. So the point is that we need to have this behavioral changes at core. And for all that, I believe communication is the strongest tool. And when I say communication is the strongest tool, we do have experiences from India itself, wherein we have seen, maybe from the other sector, if we talk about polio eradication, we all have witnessed polio eradication from India. So it started with the communication itself. The campaign ran for maybe 7 years or more. And it went to it being not only being effective communication, it was a long-lasting communication involving each and every level of the society, and the result we are today, India is polio free. Not only polio, there are many other campaigns, like we just mentioned about Swachh Bharat campaign, making even India defecation free. So we all see that there are initiatives in that sector as well. So when we talk about water sector, certainly there is a huge scope wherein the communication can play a larger role. I'll not say that there is not communication or campaigns. There are already a lot of campaigns which are being launched by the government already, involving participatory approach. And we have seen Jal Shakti Abhiyan, Jal Jeevan Mission, though I'm talking here more from the water sector, not dividing it to the rural or the urban side. However, if such campaigns are successful in the rural sector, there is high chances that such campaigns will be successful in the urban sector as well. So we are also, in fact, yesterday we had a forum wherein we also had Joint Secretary, Ministry of Urban Housing and Urban Affairs with us, and she also mentioned about Jal Jeevan Mission urban sector. So, so what I mean to say is there are policies, there are campaigns which are being run from the government side, and people are also aware about it. And in all this entire communication, we have seen that water, which had been one of the, maybe I don't know, I should say this or not, but this was one of the most neglected sector in India. And of late, if we see that the leader of the nation is also taking it and bringing it to the forefront. He had been talking about providing water, piped water supply by 2024 through Jal Jeevan Mission to various households. Not only that, he had been again and again emphasizing about the participatory approach for connecting people to all these andolans and all these campaigns which are being run by the ministry. So the idea is, it is very well understood that no matter whatever policies we have, whatever campaigns we do, unless we make it a participatory approach, a campaign for the entire public, they won't reach and they won't reap the desired results. When it comes to whether the water sector better inform public, well, that is exactly what Water Digest has been intending to do. When we started with the thought that we'll bridge the gap between the industry, water industry, and the policymakers. However, during the course of our work, we realized it's not only the synergy and the way, the alliance with which industry and policymakers should work, but it is the citizens' role too, which has to be imbibed in the entire, program. So for that, we started reaching out to a lot of NGOs and RWAs who are again the representatives of the general public. So with that thought, we have also reached out to a lot of NGOs, and I'm happy to say that we've been honest to our vision. And that's why today we have a full-fledged, online portals. And with digitization, it is a boon. So whatever we discuss, we generally create forums, regular forums for policy dialogues between policymakers and the citizens too. And it is open, it is through Facebook, it is through YouTube. So it is open to the comments by the public as well. So which shows that, public can participate, and we had been receiving a lot of good response, and we have been communicating it to the policymakers as well, so that we can create this communication channel, smoothen the communication channel between the implementers and the beneficiaries. Also, when I spoke about so many campaigns, I will say that there is another one coming up, which is Catch the Rain, Where It Falls, When It Falls. This is one of the latest campaign by Ministry of Jal Shakti. National Water Mission is leading this campaign. So specifically, if I talk about the urban settings, so I think this is one of the campaigns which needs to, wherein we can, on immediate basis, all the citizens can do participate, and we can certainly get some of the support when it comes to conserving water through the community participation. There had been certain images been showed and certain case studies been discussed by Vishwanath ji, wherein he also showed the community participation in revival of lakes. So maybe not only lakes, yes, all other water bodies at urban level, adoption can be done for the water bodies. And like Nidhi ji mentioned that yes, they are aware. When they were doing their projects, they feel the citizens are aware, the community is aware. It's only the spark which is needed. So if the wave has already set in, now it's the time that, the entire public gets together and we support this wave and take this forward. And I feel communication is the key, which has to be the main player in bringing this wave forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anupama. I think on communication in the recent months, we have certainly seen why communication by scientists is actually not obvious and is really a skill. And most of us scientists, engineers, and so on are not very well trained in communication. I think many countries have probably regretted that. On that note, I'm virtually swinging to Ms. Sandra de Vries, who has been waiting very patiently. It's still very early. Ms. de Vries, or Sandra, your work is precisely focused on something Anupama touched on getting citizens involved with water management. Other speakers have also mentioned it. And could you explain why this is so important? In the past, sometimes it was mainly an element of cosmetics. We show that we have asked the public to give comments and all is well. Or is there an actual benefit or interest in involving the public in the water sector? And I don't want to push you because you were also last, but we're short on time. So if you could briefly highlight a few things. Thank you.
Thanks, Guy. Yeah, I will try to be short. I understand we want to have an actual discussion as well at some point. So, but yeah, I mean, in short, of course, I agree that in the past, and still, I think it still happens. This is often used as an excuse to say, hey, we included the public, and in this way we can positively say that what we are doing is correct. But of course, nowadays at least, and I think I've also researched a bit in India itself, but there are, at least in the past decade, several participatory projects, I think, that are succeeding and that are working. And then, of course, I'm also looking a little bit more on the scientific participation, but definitely participatory projects can do quite some valuable additions to the water sector. And just think of ownership of the people. So I think, for example, Mr. Vishwanath, I'm not sure if I pronounce that correctly, but he mentioned being a watchdog. So I would mostly mention it more as a accountability factor, but also Mrs. Anupama, you also mentioned the transparency part. So that's more from the government side. So if you are the citizen, you hold the government accountable, but from the other side, participatory projects and activities mostly show a transparent government, which then is of course very positive, because you can follow what the government is doing, so you know where the governmental money is spent on. But yeah, for the people that are not experiencing the problem itself, it's also a way of increasing the awareness. Whether if it's not there yet, then it is a way to increase it. Education is also often key in this. So indeed, you need to communicate, but often the educational part is one of the reasons why participatory work is being done. And I think one that hasn't been mentioned a lot is agreement. I mean, if we're talking about the public, we're talking about anybody that is indeed not in the water sector, and that can also be any type of expert from another sector, or in case of conflict, for example, for the extreme valuable water resources we have, then it is very important to create these participatory dialogues, for example, by using serious gaming, participatory modeling, to make understand each other's perspective, or each other's view on these water problems, and why, for example, one group would need water more than the other, which is of course always the idea. Now, the farmers against the nature conservatists, at least that's a big problem here in the Netherlands. So I just want to hit on one very obvious example of where, at least globally, I think the public has brought along a problem that was not acknowledged for a very long time, and that is, for example, the plastic pollution problem in our waters. So not just in the oceans, but also in the rivers. And it is one of the problems that is now finally getting attention globally, also by governments, to start doing something about this. And that is only due to public participation. And then I mean bottom up, so not top down. It really comes from the public, and it is actually a way to improve the water sector without actually any investment yet from the government itself. So with that, I will close up.
Thanks, Sandra. You'll get a chance to talk a bit more about your work in citizen science a bit later, I think. So I've taken too much time. I think I'd like to hand over to my fellow batsman there, Rahul, for the second round of questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Guy. Maybe because we are kind of running short of time, so I would quite immediately jump to the second round of question, and in the same order as we did in the first round, I would like to come to Ms. Namita Vikas. Namita ji, as you highlighted in your earlier address that the private sector does not need any convincing in putting their investments, and given the risk associated, what do you think could be important enablers for the businesses or private investments when we consider citywide water management in India? So what do you think on how this risk can be alleviated, and what would really push these investments in the water sector? So your own thoughts on that, please. And maybe I would just request all the speakers to limit their talk to 2-3 minutes, given that we are running short on time. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thanks a lot, Rahul. While the other speakers were mentioning about their comments. I was also keenly listening to and at the same time looking at the questions that we have received. I think, your question is very pertinent to a couple of things. There was a mention made about municipal bonds, and there are some questions around bankability of projects or commercialization of water and how that would really impact. I think, what I have seen with my experience over the years here is finance and favorable policies are very central to any sectoral growth and towards, also fueling innovation that we are talking about. So if you look at the water sector, it is estimated that India's water and sanitation sector need an investment of 199 billion US dollars every year. And statistics show that every $1 that is invested in the water sector gives a return of $3 to $4. So that's the kind of return that we're talking about. However, from a finance standpoint, as I said, that the risks are something that need to be looked at and therefore very crucially linked to the bankability of projects. So one is lack of understanding of sector-specific risks. I think this is one of the biggest elements here. So for example, renewable energy sector in India grew and got the required financing because the sector risks were very well understood and the sector growth started right since 2007, and today we are seeing the renewable energy supply and generation and the green bonds and other financing of green, which is more over to renewable energy, and that therefore in that understanding of risks in the water sector are very important, like lack of knowledge on the overall supply chain or old technologies that hinder the flow of finance into the water sector. My second point is on policy uncertainties, variation in pricing, for example, that affect the cash flows of utilities and the borrowers. And Mr. Nabarun also mentioned, this particular aspect as to how the cash flows are very, very important when financiers look at the overall balance sheet. So how are borrowers going to do the debt serviceability? I think that is a very important question to be answered. Then poor balance sheet. So, municipal bonds have not had an uptake because of the weak balance sheets of the utilities of local bodies, and therefore this results in the risks, the revenue risks for financiers. Then looking at the overall project execution delays, making the whole project to be very expensive. So project execution delays in terms of approvals of right of way, or inaccessibility of the old piping infrastructure to enhance capacities. And these are just examples that I tried to put down. And these really hamper the financing that comes here. Small size and the long tenor of projects. So, the sizes of these investments are very small for large investors to come. And the tenors are very big because, investors normally look at a turnaround of about 5 to 7 years. And these kind of investments are need over 10 years of commitment. And that becomes a big challenge. So, like we've seen uptake of green bonds, we've seen uptake of green bonds because there were favorable policies that were issued by regulators in case of the financial regulator RBI to fuel this whole green bond market by investing or channeling capital towards infrastructure projects, right? We need to see more of that in the water sector to be able to really bring in blue bonds or water bonds or blended finance, credit enhancements kind of mechanisms. What are the roles? So World Bank some time back did do a kind of a blended finance model, but how are DFIs coming in more and more to provide those credit enhancements? I think those are the questions to really answer and look at. I want to just answer one last point on commercialization of water. And the perception of water is our Janma Siddha Hakka. It's your right and it has to be free, right? That's the philosophy or that's the thinking here. But something that is becoming scarce, and if there is some value. So we have seen in case of water ATMs, against 80 or 100 rupee for a 20 liters, there have been technologies which are delivering water at 2 rupees or 3 rupees for 20 liters. I think we need to look at these kind of technologies and invest in these kind of technologies to go to scale. So that's what I would say on all the three questions that were asked. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Namita ji. And I guess as you rightly said that, this non-renewable energy sector, kind of, come in a big way. And I think, with now leadership at the national level and in the coming time, focus being made more on the water sector, I think a lot of this, aspects would be addressed moving ahead. So now moving next to, I would now shift to Ms. Nidhi Hundir. Ma'am, in your earlier address, you talked about this program called Power of One. So maybe if you can just, elaborate a bit more about this program, and can, tell us that whether, such kind of programs in a large company, could become involved with sustainable cities or sustainable urban water management, if we can kind of address this in a peculiar manner. So if you can just share your thoughts on that program, please.
No, definitely, Rahul. I think essentially, as I also said, that corporates very much need to be seen as citizens of the cities and huge players in how these cities are formed, because it's just not about a business in that city, but also so many people come for jobs and they, start living there and they become a part of that city. So definitely, this whole ownership part is there. And before I come to Power of One, I just want to kind of reiterate, in terms of CSR strategy also, how do we really, approach water? So water, if we keep approaching it like a commodity and as consumers, perhaps we'll never reach a solution. So water itself is a being, it's something that has its own character. And if that is understood by the citizens and if we look at some of the rural development models, and especially the work with some of our HCL grant partners, for example, they're doing in terms of reviving the rivers and reviving the springs. And I think one of the success factors, or let's say the milestones or key core to strategy, has been that they approached it with a community ownership perspective, where there were a lot of these water dialogues in the cities, Jal Yatras as we call them, or Jal Samvad as we call them. And that's the whole, the civil society approach as we take towards water, where men and women, girls and boys talk about water. And those forums don't exist in urban culture, so as to say. Do we ever come together and talk about water? So that's what I mean when I say water as a being. So there are a couple of these factors, that really need to be brought together if we're looking at a very successful CSR strategy. And that's something we've been able to do in almost, 7 to 8 cities that we have really focused on water. One is the citizens' ownership, and I'll come back to Power of One concept, plus the citizens' larger, beyond our own employees' ownership, the innovation bit of it, and simple things that how do we not let the RO water go waste? What do we do with the wastewater channels which are coming out? How do we have children participating in big ways through their science project? How do they bring water conservation? So there are umpteen number of models that we have integrated in our regular education and livelihood programs where water is discussed as a subject. The traditional wisdom point, and I always make it a point to say that when it comes to water, the people who belong to those cities and people who've been living there for generations living there know about where the water bodies existed, and they must be involved in mapping where the water bodies are and how to actually maintain them. Also, there is this whole aspect of tributaries, which we often, we are also in an MOU with Namami Gange, and we've had these discussions where if we have presence, for example, in Noida, where you have Hindon and Yamuna passing, why don't all the corporates come together and make a consortium of conserving the tributaries to the main Ganges? Because of the local presence, it's very easy for us to, and that's something that we are already working on. But it's important to conserve tributaries, or let's say the feeding channels into the main rivers, and make the local citizens and the corporates and the government responsible for it. And that's one critical aspect of water management. Of course, pollution, I think Sandra did mention the plastic part, which we often keep forgetting, and that's a full part of water management. The fecal load, which is increasing through various channels, and if amongst the corporates, if we mapped and we just divided that we can protect this water body, by just investing in Of course, government is doing through hybrid financial models and so on. A lot of STPs are being put up, but smaller STPs could also be, on a I would say BOM model, be taken up by corporates. And a few places we are trying that out, especially where the rivers are meeting. So coming back to the power of one, it's a very simple concept where we say that each person has power to change, each individual has power to bring about a reform. And that's a campaign that we internally run in HCL, where employees come forward and donate rupee 1, rupee 2, or rupee 3 from their own salaries, and we create a social fund out of that. And it's not about, and that's over and above anything that happens from CSR, but that's basically for them to have this power to design their own projects and lead their own projects. In other countries, the currency could vary, but more than fund, it is the number of hours. And those hours are actually mapped to various social causes, and many of our employees actually take environment as a very big cause, and they would actually adopt certain lakes or water bodies and regularly come and monitor the work which is happening, as well as themselves involved in cleaning, maintaining, and most importantly, creating a citizens collective around those water bodies, talking to the RWAs, talking to the, and many of these water bodies are also located in semi-rural and semi-urban, because these cities are fast transforming. The nature of city is very different than a remote rural or a hardcore urban area. So most of these water bodies, as a part of our sustainability and exit plan, we always create a trust around it, which is empowered enough to take care of the water body. And that's where power of one, including HCLites, yes, but outside of HCL also there's a larger citizens collective which is getting formed. And that's power of one, essentially, that what at an individual level one can do beyond the society level action, or the government level action. And that's critical, and that goes back to what I said, that if you really want to realize and understand water as a being and not as a commodity, it's important that every person sees that they need to act on it.
Thank you, Nidhi. So yeah, what I can gather is that, irrespective of whether you belong to a city or not, but then you have a responsibility towards water, which is kind of not a private, commodity, but as a kind of a public community. So yeah, thank you very much. Now I would move to Mr. Nabrunji. Sir, maybe my kind of question to you is that, do you see a case for, international funding be a driver by mandating elements, that can kind of, look the overall philosophy of integrated water management, rather than just looking at bulk storage and basin transfers, but looking into, other aspects of utilizing water, like, as Vishwanath sir said, using treated wastewater as at least, for, let's say, non-potable purposes. So for funding for such elements, do you see that international funding, they can be a driver moving ahead when it comes to funding of such infrastructure and services?
Definitely, for sure, because I think the whole concept of infrastructure financing, out of which, as far as I know, the agencies that I have worked with, USAID and World Bank, and as I look at other donor agencies, water sanitation is one of the priority areas of all these agencies. And particularly when it comes to looking at integrated water management, one of the problems, of course, here is that any international loan or grant has to, other than the finance ministry, it has to pass through the relevant ministry. So there is one water resource ministry, there's one urban development ministry, the rural ministry, there's Ministry of Agriculture. So the point is, how do you structure the project and which ministry does it pass through for actually fund flow, and then actual administration and to see the impact, how does the implementation happen. This is one tricky area which needs to be looked at. But I think as a concept, this is definitely one of the concepts which is very attractive to international financing. Second is for water sector, borrowing from or accessing capital markets, accessing market financing is another very, very interesting area for international funding agencies. So I think there is enough potential to look at these two areas and seek funding for water management in urban areas and cities. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, sir. So given the shortage of time, I will quickly now move to Ms. Anupama. Anupama ji, we have seen that, cities that are world leaders in urban water management, they typically have this strong element of engagement with various stakeholders, and most importantly, it's citizens. And, communication would always be at a core of this connect. So in the context of India, and given its diversity, what kind of innovative mechanisms, can be employed to have this connect with the communities and, moving ahead, and so that, they become a kind of a key player in this overall water management, in the urban context? Your views, please. Okay, maybe we till the time we get her back, I would now move to Sandra. Sandra, you have worked extensively in citizen science approaches, and a key element of this would be leveraging on crowdsourcing data and information for decision making. When it comes to water management, what kind of crowdsourced data do you think would be useful for city managers to have that would used for decision makings? And maybe perhaps you could talk from your experience in Europe, which could be applied in an Indian context also.
Thank you, Rahul. Yeah, of course. So just for the people that are not specifically aware of what citizen science or crowdsourcing is, very short, you can summarize it as an active involvement of the public or citizens, or some people say non-professionals in the topic that you're working on, into a scientific endeavor. And this could be done for specific monitoring, so in a long-term setup, or to answer short scientific or more practical research questions that could solve a scientific question or more of a practical issue that is occurring in the water sector. So if you look at, for example, like the normal monitoring in the water sector, then it's done by experts, either manually or automatically by sensors that are installed at the several locations. And the idea of citizen science is that you can actually do that with a much larger crowd, with many people that can help and invest their time, their efforts, but also indeed their knowledge from a different perspective. For example, several ways of doing it, for example, for rainfall measurements, is to use very low-cost rainfall measurement devices. I'm not sure if people can see this, but this is a rainfall measurement device made from a plastic bottle and a ruler. That is almost the only thing you need. And that is, for example, a project that we are currently doing in the city of Delft in the Netherlands, which is done with an organization that is called Smartphones for Water, and they have been doing a lot of research already in Nepal as well. So that's very near to India. And the same method has been used there to engage with citizens in a city and measure the rainfall with a much more higher density than is possible if only experts would do that. So if only the the professionals in the water sector would do that, then you would not reach the amount of spatial data that you can reach with citizen science. So that's one of the biggest benefits from the perspective of a scientist or a practitioner to involve the crowd. To do this, however, you need to often simplify or give trainings. And of course, also, you need to make sure that you can represent a data quality that is acceptable. And this is often the biggest doubt for any type of organization that wants to work with citizens' data, is that they think, well, an expert can, if an expert can do it, it doesn't mean that a citizen can do it who has not been trained properly. But if you, much research has shown that this can be done very well. However, to be able to really prove that, you need to show it with a method of validation. So, for example, this rainfall project that I'm mentioning, what we do is we also ask people to pass on a picture of the rainfall measurements, so you can always check whether or not the measurement has been done well. But it's also a way to educate the people that are joining. So, for example, in the first couple of weeks when you take measurements, there can be a feedback loop back towards the citizen, asking them or telling them that, for example, they have to measure in millimeters and not in centimeters, or to measure, for example, if you have the water in such a rain gauge is often done with has a specific cone, and if you measure the rainfall, you need to go and look on the lowest, the bottom of the cone, you could say. These type of things you can learn while doing, but on the other hand, as I said, coming back to it, you need to guarantee this quality of data. And what is nowadays, and why citizen science is much more coming up nowadays, is because of the smartphone possibilities. As I said, sending a picture and via the internet is nowadays not such a big deal anymore. So you can do these type of mass engagement processes in a much easier way. Another example, I think in India itself, is that, for example, there is this big project going on to get a feedback loop from people using the drinking water facilities that are done via small piped systems. So by using the smartphone, they can give feedback to the providers. In that way, showing when there's no pressure, for example, or when they even can take water quality measurements and then give feedback to the providers, and in that way improve the water system for the users itself. So it's also often very beneficial for the people itself.
Yeah.
I hope I answered your question in some way.
No,
it's quite an elaborate question.
Thank you very much. And I guess, I think the citizen science would have a big scope in India, given that now we have more number of smartphones than toilets. So I'm sure, big opportunity for people to kind of, be in this drive in the water sector. So maybe because we just lost Ms. Anupama earlier, so I would come back to you, Anupama ji. So my question is, the cities, that we have seen who are world leaders in urban water management, they have this very, strong element of citizen connect. And at the core is always, communication as one of the very important factor. So in the context of India, and given its diversity, the kind of, people we have, what kind of mechanisms, innovative mechanisms do you think can be employed while communicating with communities and ensuring that, we have that connect and we have the people's, engagement in the process? Your thoughts, please.
Thank you, Rahul, for this question. And yes, see, that's right. Communication has to be at the core when we talk about specifically for the water sector. And participatory approach is one approach which we have to follow. Having said that, if we talk about the leading countries specifically for urban water management like Singapore, Netherlands, you'll see that even which Miss Sandra, spoke, she said, she gave us a more clear idea that there is a very open communication channel between the between the policymakers and the beneficiaries. So that shows that the governance structure is so strong that whatever you need to communicate, you are directly reaching out to the right person. So that's where I feel we have a large gap, and we really need to improve on further. And the communication channel has to be smooth. You take an example from anywhere, Netherlands, Singapore, Israel, you'll find that these communication channels are very, very open, not only for the water sector, but environment sector as a whole. We do have Aarhus Convention also, wherein people can participate. They know about how they can participate when it comes to the environment sector. But we cannot certainly imply the same innovative options in India. There is no blueprint to such innovative and innovations. Yes, we can learn from the strategy they follow, and maybe when we are making our own policies and we are making our own strategy, we can take some learnings from them. Like if I talk about Singapore, we all are aware about the concept of new water. So for that also, not necessarily, though it is fit for the potable use, but necessarily it primarily goes for the industrial use and the irrigation purpose. There also, a major point is, even from childhood, children are being taken to the museum, the state of art museum, for this new water. The idea is not to make them understand the technology. The idea is to make them connect that this is what is happening, and maybe, this is what you will be looking at, and it's all pure from every angle. So what I'm wanting to say here is that these are certain strategy, and we can definitely learn from them. When we are making our own, we can definitely invite these points here. Whatever conditions we have, I feel going on to the innovations with the kind of infrastructure we hold and the kind of funding we have, maybe it's better that we do with what we have right now in hand, because the need is to join the dots. We do have a couple of things wherein even if we can't make it drinkable today, we can at least take it to the level wherein we can at least use it for the industrial purpose. 37% of untreated waters goes like this. So maybe we can at least utilize it and takes it to the industrial or irrigation purpose. And there I feel let's connect the dots. We have students like Ms. Nidhi mentioned about children being involved. Also Ms. Sandra mentioned about the children's role. So maybe right now I see that students, the children, they can definitely bring the change, and whatever we do today, it's not only for us, we're doing it for them as well. So they must know that what kind of future and the world they are entering into. So it's very important that we involve them right from the early stage. It should be, it is already a part of education system now when we talk about water. However, it has to be imbibed more in the entire education system. Students should be motivated to gauge their own water footprints at home. And, like in Singapore, there is another case study which I was reading, that they have a very interesting water use efficiency app through which they have launched through the local operator, through which one can actually kind of gauge their water usage for various activities. They know that which device exactly is using how much amount of water. So I'm saying these are few learnings. So, and we all are moving ahead in this smart age as well. So definitely these are few points, and we can connect better. Second thing is, when we talk about the policymakers, we have seen that there are CSR initiatives also, and we still have RWAs, which maybe they're not taking ownership as of now, but we all agree that during this pandemic, we have seen the power RWA holds. They are the one who can implement whatever they want to implement in their areas, and they are very well connected to the municipal authorities. So maybe this channel can be utilized, and we need to build up further on whatever available options we have. Like I said in the previous questions also answer also, that rainwater harvesting campaign is coming up. So maybe that's the right time, right before the monsoon, why not to approach the respective RWAs and motivate them to be part of this campaign. So I'm not saying that overnight will change the scenario of India as far as water conservation is concerned, but we do have these dots. If we join them, I think we will be able to contribute at least a bit for managing this demand supply gap up to some extent, and involving citizens, especially the students and the RWAs and other groups.
Thank you, Anupama ji. So I guess we are a bit running short of time, but we had a lot of kind of, questions posted by the attendees, and, our team at the back end was kind of trying to, pick few questions which we can answer, but definitely we will reach out to all of them with their specific question. So maybe at this point, Vishwanath sir, I would have a question for you. Sir, you have done significant work in rainwater harvesting systems, and the biggest challenge that we face while implementing such systems is the monitoring and operation and maintenance of such structures. In your experience, how do you think that this issue can be addressed?
Well, it's a patience game. We have to trust citizens and their ability and willingness to do something, right? So the state cannot be a sort of an overbearing policeman watching out whether things are being done correctly or not all the time, right? So what's happening here in Bangalore is that there was a time gap given, about 3 years. Now the state utility will come and check the water harvesting system. And if you're not doing it correctly, there will be a fine levied on your water bill, which will be about 50% of your water bill. But I'm not personally in favor of these kind of sort of punitive measures. I would rather that we build a positive communication strategy whereby citizens do it because it's good for them and it's good for the city, right? But then, like in many things in India, we need a lot of patience and time to make sure that it gets implemented well.
Okay, thank you, sir. Next in line, again, I would have a question for Nidhi ji. From the private sector perspective, what kind of enabling environment would you like to see in a city to help you scale up your CSR efforts? And how can a city be more welcoming to the private sector?
So I think, see, there's a whole lot of investment that goes through corporate social responsibility funds. Talk about reviving the lakes, reviving the ponds, which were, lying dead and dirty. When we start working on some of these water bodies, we find a lot of muck over there, a whole lot of plastic and whole lot of garbage dumped into the water bodies, and then when we start our work, we obviously partner with the district authorities, the local level authorities, the municipal corporations, and we make these visits on foot. I mean, I was doing the last water body assessment. I remember walking couple of kilometer, kind of 1 kilometer, 2 kilometer inside to even find whether this was actually a water body. And that's where we see a whole lot of, what do you call, a lack of ownership by the citizens, the neighboring citizens themselves. And that's where, and at times, local communities might just come and say that it is the responsibility of either government or a corporate or an NGO partner. And that's where a whole lot of work starts in terms of converting or the behavioral change. And as Anupama was also saying about communication, I think a very critical role in actually making high-level behavioral change communication campaigns where people start owning. And if the citizens and the local citizens start welcoming and start realizing the importance as well as the level of effort that goes in reviving a dead water body to a live, beautiful, thriving, water body that is that invites birds and that has a butterfly corridor around it. So it's a city of dreams, that comes. Everybody talks about it, but then we go on ground and we do it with our volunteers. But it would be very. I would say it would be a dream realized when citizens start owning it. And from the point of view of authorities' participation, I think that messaging would be very important to the citizens. And one point which I would also like to say is that it should also become a voting or let's say election agenda, which we often don't see. And in India, a lot gets moved around. So do when MLAs go campaigning or when there is this whole campaigning which happens, do we talk about the local water bodies and do we talk about the city's water as an election agenda. So it's important to have it as a part of election manifesto as well. And then ownership coming from the legislative as a part. They also have some funds, which can be directed towards conservation of water. So that would actually make us feel more confident to put in our CSR funds into water conservation.
Thank you, Nidhi ji. My next question would be for Sandra. Sandra, the question posted by is, how do we ensure that the good quality crowdsourced data is actually used by the government agencies for decision making? Or in other words, how do we synergize community efforts with the government machinery?
Thank you, Rahul. Yeah, so I think part of the answer I tipped upon already in my last answer. It's that one of the biggest problems is that they don't often trust the data. So you have to make sure that you can validate it, that you can show in a scientific way that this is correct data. So if this is a citizen science organization or project that is started from like bottom up, I would suggest that you do two things. First of all, always try to involve scientists. So either way, I think it's possible to do a citizen science research without involving actual scientists, but to make sure that everybody trusts it, and then you have more people on your side, but also that you can have the benefit of the knowledge of a scientist to also analyze and help understand the resulting data. I think that is one of the key factors. But second of all, and that I would definitely add to is there are two factors, is involve more stakeholders from the beginning. So that's like with any type of project or any type of work that you're doing, the more stakeholders you involve from the start, the more, and that takes more time and more effort. That's definitely the case. But the more you can take into account their interests and needs, the more that the message that you want to bring with your data will be accepted. And then at last, and then I come back to the keyword I think of today is also communication. Exactly, make sure that not only you communicate it to the policymakers, but also communicate it back to all the people that are joining the endeavor. So all the citizen scientists, how we call them, that have joined in collecting the data. So make sure that everybody knows what the impact can be or is of the results that are found. I think that those three things are essential. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. And maybe coming to the last question, that is for Anubama ji. In your experience, how does the communication strategy for different sections of society differ in your experience?
See, the strategy, like I said that earlier also, the strategy has to be different for every segment. Like unless, if I'm talking about the middle income group or maybe an upper income group wherein I'm not facing any crisis pertaining to water, and it's more like a monthly payment of the bill and nothing beyond that. We do not consider it as a resource which needs an equitable distribution and we need to manage it properly. So definitely the strategy when we're talking about the communication to these groups, it has to be a different strategy. While if you talk about that segment of the strata wherein they are not even receiving say 40 LPCD of water on daily basis, for them the strategy has to be in such a way that they feel connected to the overall system. Maybe if they are not powerful enough to communicate their thoughts to the decision maker, there has to be a group, representative group, which can communicate their thoughts to the policymaker and put forward their problems in front of the decision makers. So definitely, so the strategy has to differ. Not only the strategy in terms of the groups and strata, even if we move on to different geographical locations, different languages we have in different cities. So maybe considering that based on the dialects and the kind of understanding individuals have, the strategy needs to have all these points as part of the over communication system, overall communication system. Yeah.
Thank you, Anupama. Yeah, with this, we come to an end of this question round, and I thank you all the speakers for sharing their thoughts. And with that, I will hand over back to Guy.
Thank you, Rahul. And we've run comfortably over our time, so sorry for that also for the panelists and participants. So I'll be very brief. I have a few notes just to explain maybe also the way forward for us, but just 1 minute. So this is the final webinar also of the two we have, and I would therefore once again wish to thank our partners, NIUA, and also the National Clean Ganga Mission, who were part of our previous webinar, and particularly our eloquent panelists today and also in the previous webinar. I think we really have a very nice cocktail of profiles and of experiences. And I can see from the messages coming in on nearly every topic, people are saying we should have a webinar specifically on this or specifically on that. I don't know if we're going to do that, but it's exciting to see that people get triggered by many of your interventions. So from our side, UNESCO and NIUA will continue to work on broadly capacity building for integrated urban water management. We have a direct product which will be a policy brief based on the webinars. We have a UNESCO conference on megacities and water in Paris in December, and we really hope that several of India's megacities will participate. NIAU and UNESCO are preparing a paper, particularly on Delhi's possible readiness for IUWM. So we have a lot of things that we're working on. And we would like to use the kind of momentum and the networking that we've done for these webinars to find a way to continue having a platform, not necessarily a structure or something, but continuing the communication on this, because I've also sensed that there are many things that we don't know that others do. So there is an opportunity to keep that communication going. So we have to figure out how we do that. And we, as partners, we also hope to do some pilot projects in a number of Indian cities, partly to see if we can work towards IUWM with them, but also as a learning tool for other cities. So if you, the experiences that you gain in cities that are embarking on this can be used to train planners in other cities and managers and show them how things can work. So a lot of action is still coming, and I'm sure we'll meet all of you at some stage, and that probably goes for many of the participants also. So those are just my concluding words, and I would say, meanwhile, everyone stay healthy, and thanks again for participating, and again apologies for running a little bit over time. So goodbye for now from us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone.